Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Eva. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today I have a very special guest and a friend. His name is David Buckland. Hi, David.
Hi.
Hi. Very nice to have you here. So I'm just going to do a short introduction that if people don't know you, know a little bit more about you. So you are a spiritual teacher and an author, and you are based in Canada. And you wrote this very amazing book that also helped me on my path of awakening. So it's Our Natural Potential. So I'm just showing it here. People are
Thank you.
interested. Beyond Personal Development, the 7 Stages of Enlightenment. So that was a really helpful book. Thank you for writing this, David.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Yes, I saw a lot of people were going through the process either outside of a tradition or in a tradition, but their unfolding was happening differently than the tradition described.
mm.
And so I wanted to try and help support people through that process and recognize the common variations and essentially how this ancient model of the stages was being experienced in the current time.
Yeah, and did you interview those people or did you meet them like on retreats and stuff? Like, how did you find those people?
Well, I met them on retreats. I had a
Mm.
support role on retreats to help people with shifts that they had had. Also, I write on these topics a lot on a large blog, and so people would write to
Exactly.
me about it or in comments or on the
Yeah.
article, that kind of thing. So yeah, it kind of an interesting circumstance, but I've gotten to know many people going through the various stages, and so um, it's giving me a wide range of experience with it, but also it broke a lot of concepts that I had about this is the way it happens or this is the sequence it happens in or whatever like that. And I saw, through talking to all these people about all these variations and how it can unfold. But there is a common underlying process.
Mm.
I sometimes use the analogy of puberty. Everybody goes through puberty, but there's a lot of variation in how it's experienced and how intense it is or how mild it is or whatever,
Mm.
what comes along with it. And
Yeah, I mean, I really like that you say that because everybody's so different and it's just so good that people know everybody's awakening is also just very unique. And yeah,
yeah,
so that's very
and in a
important.
sense, that's why we're here as apparently separate individuals, is to have a distinctive experience of the whole.
Yeah.
And so we contribute our perspective, our unfolding to the whole.
Hmm. Yeah, and let's also mention your blog right away. So you have a website with over, I think, 2,000 blog posts, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing. When did you start it? When did you start writing?
In 2007,
Oh,
shortly
wow.
after I woke up, it just started flowing out. I
Yeah.
had some concept that I was no good as a writer, but
Yeah.
so I didn't do much writing, but then it just started happening anyways.
Yeah. And so the topics just came in and then you decided, okay, I'm going to write about this. Is it like automatic writing or is it something that you were interested in and then you researched or how did it happen?
It varies. Sometimes it's topics from what uh, people have asked me about. Sometimes it's topics related to things I'm reading or studying or whatever like that. Like these days, I've been studying trauma therapy, so I've written a bunch of articles
Mm.
on trauma, um, and then just things that come up in my experience, and I recognize things a little differently, or see another perspective, or whatever. And so I just riff a bit on that, and
Mm.
yeah, and
Yeah.
some articles are popular and some aren't. It really.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, very amazing. So people can subscribe to your blog, right, to receive them regularly. I'm gonna put the link to your website then below the video description or into the video description and also the link to the book so that people can find that. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I really wanted to have a conversation with you because I mean we see each other very regularly. You are joining my Zoom meeting that I have on every Thursday. And it's so
Yeah,
nice to
that's
have you there. I mean, you've been there for the past year, I think. And I told you many times, or just before as well, that your presence, I can feel your presence in the group, and it's just so beautiful. You're holding the space, and this, it's always a very powerful group session, and you're contributing to that, and that's very, very nice. So thank you so much
oh, you're
again for
welcome.
doing
I
that.
enjoyed
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so very amazing. Cool. And so we kind of decided to talk about the levels of consciousness and in more detail about the higher levels, because it seems like there's a lot of interest in higher levels, the Brahman, ParaBrahman, pure divinity, and what might come after. So we're going to talk about that. But we're also just going to go through the lower levels just briefly so that people have an understanding. So maybe you want to start, since you wrote this book and you know all about it. So in the
Okay.
perfect way. Yeah.
So yeah, the initial stage, quite commonly people call it awakening, although the term is used for other stuff as well. It's a shift where we could say consciousness has three fundamental aspects. There's the observer aspect, what we experience from here. We experience from here looking out. There's the observed aspect, the world around us that we're experiencing. And then there's the process between the two.
Mm.
So in the initial shift, what happens is the observer aspect, or sometimes called the witness, wakes up to itself. So all this time before that, it's been experiencing through this body-mind out into the world, and generally through spiritual practices and so on. There's a culturing of the physiology and a recognition of that observing quality of consciousness. But then at a certain point, it sees itself.
Mm-hmm. So that's
Not
still,
often.
that's all in witnessing, right?
Yeah, that's the
That's
witnessing
the
part.
witnessing.
And then we get into the actual awakening. And generally speaking, most people wake up with a catalyst, and usually in the form of an awake teacher. Occasionally, it's something like somebody's walking down the sidewalk and there's a car honk, and they wake up with a
Yeah.
startle.
Yeah.
And but generally speaking, it's with someone with an awake teacher that the awakeness in them triggers the awakeness
Mm.
within. So there's that inner awakeness wakes up. So you mentioned about the witness. So there can be a witness coming online prior to awakening, but more commonly it comes online with the awakening. And that's just essentially that having that neutral observer watching
Mm.
through the body mind. So whereas before we were the ego self and more caught up in what we were experiencing. We may experience ourselves as the body or as the mind or as our thoughts or whatever.
Yeah.
We're kind of tied up in it. But when we step back into this witnessing observer, we're just watching. We're seeing the thoughts happening, the emotions go by, the sensations in the body, and so on. It's just going by, and we're just watching it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you talk about awakening, this would be self-realization, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
self-realization or cosmic consciousness is another term for
Yeah.
it.
Okay. And can you briefly describe the difference between um, the self-realization and the witnessing? Because I didn't have an experience of the witnessing, but as you describe it, it feels like it came online at the same time. Because this is
Right.
when I had this, observing from the background. Um, yeah, so it was both at the same
Yeah,
time for me.
yeah. I witnessed myself for about 30 years before I finally
All
woke
right.
up.
All right.
It was a little harder to wake up before, because of the collective consciousness
Yes,
was.
yes, of course.
Um, so yeah, witnessing is when the observer comes online. So it's kind of there's observing quality is
Mm.
there, and sometimes people have it for short periods of time and it falls back again, and sometimes people it can kind of kick in and stay on all the time. And the distinctive thing about that is it's 24/7.
Mm.
It may not be clear in sleep, depending on how much fatigue there is in the physiology and so on. But it's there. There's a sense of continuity of self. With the ego, we go to sleep every night. The ego is a function of the mind. And so when the mind goes to sleep at night, so does the ego. We
Mm-hmm.
essentially lose the ego every night.
Yeah, this is true because when we wake up in the morning, it starts like forming itself again, and there is like this moment before this happens.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is so fascinating, like there's this moment of total silence, peace, and clarity, and then suddenly the ego starts to form itself, and it's like, oh my God, I'm back. But it's coming back.
Yeah, especially if we're alert like that in the morning and we see it coming back
Yeah.
because the ego doesn't like to be seen. So its
Oh,
whole
that's
technique is to be hidden and not to be noticed so that it can stay in control because it wants to be in control.
yeah, okay.
Um,
That's interesting.
so yeah, so it doesn't like to be seen. So it can be a bit of a startle response when it comes on like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so what happens with awakening is that observer quality wakes up to itself. In a Sanskrit context, they talk about Jiva and Atman. And Jiva is kind of like the witnessing observer thing. And then Atman is the self, the collective self. And when it's like Jiva recognizes itself as Atman, it's kind of that's when the awakening happens. So Jiva can kind of wake up, but then it wakes up to its true nature as consciousness, as Atman.
And how was
that's
your experience of that? How was your experience of that? How did
for
you
me.
experience it? Yeah.
For me, I was listening to a teacher on a conference call, and he used the word surrender for the first time. To me, surrender was a word like uh, blind faith or something there was some resistance to normally. But for some reason, this time I heard it differently. And for me, it was kind of like dropping it down this clear funnel, and then bink.
Oh.
And then, that's the kind of pop as they used to describe it sometimes when people woke up in a group. It was like popcorn going off. But um, and I didn't know what it was. I had all these concepts about what awakening was, but I had this idea that I was going to wake up, that David was going to wake up, right? But that's not what it was. And so for about a day and a half, I didn't know what it was. It's like, but then I woke up the next morning and I just kind of knew. The clarity had come. It was quite funny too because I couldn't figure out how to meditate right after I woke up because the person that meditated wasn't there anymore. And so it was like there was a sense of the ego death for me with the witnessing. But then I kind of realized the ego was still there, but it was just no longer the center. It was kind of over to one side, kind of like it was like you have a thumb, it's like it was there as a
Also
function,
there.
but
Okay,
it was
that's
not
interesting.
it was not who I was. There were still preferences and some habitual stuff around the ego, but it was no longer who I was.
That's interesting because for me it was different. So the ego was still there, and the patterns and all the human stuff and everything was still there. It was just okay. The observer came online. I witnessed myself from the background, or this is the self looking at itself.
Yeah.
Everything was happening in that, and the vision changed. So this was really interesting actually because it closed down, and everything beside there was black. So I only saw like through a camera lens, and I had to look like this because now the vision is wide, then it opens up again. But before then, the vision was closed down. So I thought it was so interesting because there was actually
Oh,
a,
interesting.
a physical
Yeah,
change.
I didn't notice that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I guess it depends because certainly when you become really big, then their vision seems very small
Yeah,
relative to.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
But
and for some people, what happens is kind of like there's the shift. It's really high contrast, um, and then it gets normal really fast in a matter of a few hours or a few days. It just becomes normal and ordinary, and people start to think that they lost it. But then they remember we were mentioning this beforehand. I remember thinking like I can't remember what it's like not to be awake. And then I saw this guy, I was walking down the street and I saw this guy going the other way who was kind of drunk and angry. And I was like, oh, there it is.
yeah, yeah.
And
It
but
integrates really quickly. Like I have this experience, I had this experience as well. So maybe it seems a bit weird for a few days, you see the difference, but then you don't remember exactly what you said, how it was before. It's like the information is lost. You
yeah,
don't know how it was before.
and it also just feels very ordinary
Mm.
and normal. And that's a surprise for a lot of people because they're expecting some, fireworks, whatever. And it's just this. And so some people actually have a really soft shift. They just kind of gradually shift. And it's kind of when you are the self and someone nearby wakes up to the self, they woke up because it's the same self.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so they woke up, but they're not sure that they woke up, and so sometimes for some people it takes a while the mind is still strong and doubting and it takes them a little while to kind of confirm to themselves that it's okay, and then they can relax into it more.
Yeah, so I didn't have a shift. It was more a gradual unfolding. but because the time I was in self-realization was like maybe 6 months, or maybe no, it was a year. No, 6 months around, it was kind of short. So, you know, like if you're there longer, it just experienced it a lot different. Like in Unity, I was there 1.5 years. So the experience was just so deep, like a lot deeper. You know what I mean? The integration was just very different. It's always how long are you there to actually experience that and then integrate it?
Fill it out, yeah. And sometimes what can happen is the shifts happen fairly quickly. And then there's a period of time where you're kind of integrating multiple shifts at the same time. You're still integrating the first shift when the second shifts happen, then the third shift. Yeah, I think I've 3 people now I know have gone from waking up to Brahman in less than 6 months. So it can happen very fast
Fascinating,
sometimes.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like
wow.
the engine is revving. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
but
Whoosh.
it's nice when it's a little slower because then you have a chance to enjoy each stage.
And you have time to like also integrate it into your everyday life experience, you know, because I
Yes.
think this is also very important to integrate it in all areas of your life. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So
Anyways,
I mean, on contrast, I know people who spent 8 years just to be confident that they'd woken up for the
yeah,
first day.
yeah,
So
interesting.
the process really varies, usually somewhere in between. And the speed varies too. Like for me, I witnessed for many years. So when I finally woke up, it was really, really clear. And then the next couple of stages came fairly quickly. And then it slowed down. The stages in consciousness happen fairly quickly. Um, so I was in self-realization for 2 months, and then the God consciousness stage for 2 months, and then unity. Um, and then unity was, I think, 3 years. And unity is kind of this more of a progressive stage.
Yeah.
So the God consciousness stage that comes after is somewhat optional. One of the things that's useful to understand about this process is there's kind of two parallel processes that are intertwined, but they're somewhat distinct. Sometimes they call them the masculine and the feminine, or the Shiva and the Shakti. Um, but the Ayurveda describes it as Atman and Sattva. It's a consciousness, essentially, and purity or clarity. And those are also cumulative from prior lifetime spiritual development. So we don't all start from the same place. It kind of depends on our past life development, and most of us have no clue what that is. It just goes
Yeah.
up. We can kind of go along for a certain way, and it's not until we wake up that we find out what sattva is actually there. And so the second stage is dominated by the heart awakening, because once you have that stable platform of being, you're in infinite peace and stability, then the heart has a safe space to awaken on. And it's kind of like a higher octave of the heart, universal love and compassion and so on like that. And that has an opportunity to wake up. And that's a pretty interesting stage. It's like, your heart becomes bigger than your chest, and it's just kind of like this, all this love pouring out, and you got to figure out where to put it. But,
So that's what you experienced in God consciousness, you mean?
yeah.
Okay.
And it
That's very
depends on, your individual variation. Some people have a more muted form of it, but then that kind of then depends on the form that we most want to express to. Like it might be to the guru, it might be to God or the divine, however we relate to that, or it might be to one's partner or mate, that as examples. Uh,
So basically this love coming in, and there is so much love and you don't really know where to do what to do with it, because there is so much love and just pouring in, pouring
it's
in.
just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
pouring
Just
out. No, it's pouring
out.
out.
Sorry, out.
Pouring
Yeah,
out.
out. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, and the other aspect of that is refinement, because sattva is about refinement. So there's a refinement of perception. So you got the consciousness deep within that's become awake, and you've got the surface level of experience, but there's all those layers in between, the layer of emotions and the mind and the level of the intellect where subtle structure, people talk about sacred geometry, that kind of stuff is on. Then there's what's known as the causal or celestial level, where there's fine vibrations of first becoming, all the things we're experiencing around us are coming. And then there's a kind of a field of pre-manifestation I refer to as creation. It's kind of where the subtle structures are that aren't manifest, they don't manifest, but it's kind of the field of the space of consciousness before
Mm-hmm.
it starts to manifest. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's the dynamics of consciousness itself that I touched on earlier. And so there's all those layers that can unfold potentially. And it depends on our orientation. Some people will have no interest in that. Some people will have an interest in a very specific thing. Like as a healer, you've put your attention on a very specific stuff, and so that those kinds of qualities develop with your attention. I
Yeah,
had a lot of
interesting.
interest in the subtle structures of creation,
Mm-hmm.
um, and so those developed to a degree. And it really depends. There's such a vast field, and there's so many potential things that could develop in that stage. But a lot of people skip it pretty much and come back and they kind of do the heart opening and that, you know, later on, post Brahman,
And how
whatever.
did you experience it? How did you experience God consciousness?
Well, there was there was a few things about it. There was the awakening heart part. Um, it was interesting for me because I was single, but my orientation is to flow to a partner. And so an awake friend that I had a lot of resonance with kind of subbed for that. Um, and so she kind of stood in as my object of devotion. And I just kind of blasted her with a whole lot of love.
Oh,
Yeah,
good for her. Good for
yeah,
her.
yeah. It was interesting to be friends, but and to
Yeah.
have all this love going on. And it was kind of a phase though. So like I mentioned, it was only lasted a couple of months. And then the unity shift happened.
Mm.
Um,
I
and
would just also share how it happened for me. It was very different. It was more when I was in nature, or not always, but I had a few experiences with it, and the longest one was on my birthday, so that was really nice. It was like something opened up, and I saw everything as like the divinity in everything. Or probably
right,
that's probably the wrong word to use, but or God in everything, since you call it God consciousness. So everything was vibrant and golden and blissful. So everything I
exactly.
looked at was full of bliss, and I actually felt the bliss on my eyeballs, and there was an exchange of bliss, and I felt my whole body felt like bliss. It was
Beautiful.
blissful. Yeah. So I had a
Yeah,
few openings, but like 10 minutes or 20 minutes, and the longest one was on my birthday for 2 hours on a hike, which was really, really nice. Yeah, and this was like, I don't know, happened also probably in around 2 months' time, but it was like a few openings. So this is how I
yeah.
experienced.
Well, it's really nice, but yeah, it's really hard to sustain that in our world. The golden part, that's the sattva,
Mm-hmm.
and it has a color quality to it. And yeah, I've had experiences like that as well. I remember on a retreat one time where just everything was basically a sea of gold, and there was
Yeah.
kind of these big colors in it that were actually the actual forms and people and stuff like that around me. But it was all just gold and this sort of vibrant gold light that was
Yeah.
shimmering, and yeah, it's pretty
This would
amazing.
be a stage that I would have wanted to be there forever, This
Well,
like,
for me, Unity was my favorite.
oh yeah.
Actually, I guess I could say refined Unity because it was like those qualities in a Unity
Yeah, yeah,
context.
of
That
course.
was
Yeah.
what I loved. Yeah,
Yes, yes.
yeah,
But I mean,
yeah,
just from how everything looked, from that aspect, not from the human aspect, but like in that moments when everything was open, it also felt like a totally detachment of the human, but it was only there for this amount of time, so it
yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
for good.
But it's
Yeah.
also like you're living heaven there
Mm.
on earth, right?
Yeah. And
it's
that's
like
what I
right
meant. That
there.
was so beautiful,
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 It is really amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Then let's go
and,
to
yeah,
unity.
and it's just like I had a spiritual teacher once mentioned that I was a fountain of bliss.
Oh yeah.
That phase, yeah. Um, there's a pink light coming out the top of my head.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Beautiful.
and
Pink.
yeah, it was pretty blissful period in there. Just but it was not entirely grounded yet. So one of the things that can happen through that phase too is kind of periods of ecstasy
Yeah.
where you get blasted and you can end up rolling on the floor and kind of laughing and crying at the same time. And the crying is of joy. So yeah, for me, one of those experiences happened when when I was driving down the main road in my truck, and um, I'm kind of just cruising along, and all of a sudden, just blam! This really really intense bliss comes on in, and it just laughing out loud and crying, and the radio was on, and the song "I'm So Effing Happy I Could Cry" comes on, and
Yeah.
the clouds part slightly, and this beam of light comes down in my truck, and I'm just like, whoa! And yeah, happily my body knew how to drive, and so I just kind of kept driving properly. And but holy cow, yeah.
Because
And
that's really, really beautiful. Yeah.
yeah,
Cool.
I've had a few of those. One
Mm.
time I was in a quiet, I was in this listening to a conference call with a spiritual teacher, and I'm trying really really hard not to burst out laughing. And so I'm kind of like suppressing it and just gonna stop. And I kind of got up and moved around a little bit. And people were like, "Are you okay? Is wrong?" It's like, oh, something's right. It's just like, yeah. So there was a kind of a joke. A few people I knew talked about. One of the guys in his back cap interview mentions too. He was in the front row of an audience, and when this happened for him, he was just laughing out loud.
Mm.
Although I do remember one time I was in a church, and I was kind of chuckling to myself quite quietly. Not, it wasn't a
Yeah.
blasting one, but it's like just some bliss flow going on. I was sitting there chuckling, and the teacher, the minister rather, stopped her service and asked me what was so funny.
What's so funny, David? The guy tried to be very serious. Oh yeah. I
Life was
mean,
just great. Everything was just funny in those days. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but I mean, I had a few of those experiences as well, but mostly on retreats, and there was a lot of energy there, at that time. And then a lot of people just had laughs, were laughing, and I did too. And this was probably the best laughs I had in my life. It was just there's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
joyous, so much, and there's bliss at the same time, and laughter and joy, and yeah, it's so cool. But I mean,
Yeah.
this is just a side effect of the awakening, right? It's just part of it. So it's
Yeah.
not that's not awakening,
Yeah.
having these experiences is part of it. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Mm.
Very good point. And one of the things too is that now that's still there, but it's normal now.
Mm.
It's kind of like there's just this kind of background of pleasantness, I guess you could call it.
I call
And
it the joy of existence. This is how I
yeah,
call it. Yeah.
would be
So it's
yeah,
there all the time. Yeah.
yeah. And whereas before it was new, and it was uh, pushing through stuff that was a little plugged up and stuff, and so it just kind of comes in as a blast, and
Oh, that's interesting. Okay,
yeah,
to see that
yeah.
way. Hmm.
And it becomes normal. It's not like it's gone away or something like that. It becomes normal, just like the
Mm.
awakening.
Mm.
Um, Yeah, so essentially what happens over time, there's various ways it's talked about, but essentially what happens is the consciousness, we start to recognize the world around us as basically playing out on a field of consciousness. It's like a movie screen, like the world is playing out on a movie screen, and that screen is consciousness. And then there's a recognition that that consciousness is the same self within. So essentially the world of form around us and the inner subject are recognized to be one and the same, and they come together into one wholeness. And so there's no longer an inside and an outside. It's all within. It's all the self. It's all
Mm.
consciousness.
Hmm.
And as that refines, if there's been that in with the God consciousness stage, if there's been the development of what they call the personal God, essentially it's the form or style of God we most relate to can arise, and as an object of devotion potentially, or so on like that. For me, that arose, but not so much as an object of devotion. For me, I favored the friend, as I talked about, and then that can develop much more. After the unity shift, if there's been that refinement process, then there's a refined unity stage,
Mm.
and that can go much deeper.
And that's very interesting because I remember reading God consciousness in your book and then also unity consciousness. And I like I didn't have that experience in God consciousness you were just describing. I had it in unity. So it was totally
Right.
absent for me in God consciousness. Yeah. And
Right,
because then I
right.
was confused for a little bit. Okay, I'm experiencing that in unity, what you wrote in God consciousness, but I experience it in unity.
Yeah,
This
exactly.
recognition. Yeah. So it was for
And
me
like I
was
say,
there.
there's those two parallel processes
Yeah.
of the refinement and the consciousness part, and they're intertwined, but where they, like one of the old names for refined unity is unity in God consciousness. It's kind of
Ah.
like I think God consciousness is one of the difference between the sides is that we start off with an awakening in consciousness. There's a shift in like waking up to the observer and then waking up to the observed. There are shifts in our relationship with consciousness, in the dynamics of consciousness. And whereas in refinement, it kind of builds up to a climactic shift. It's known as God realization. And that happens if it's worked to that point, it happens in refined unity. Essentially, we reach a point where with unity, there's kind of a progression of unification. Like initially, there's that unification in consciousness, but then we're going around our day, we're seeing like, oh, I see you, you are the self, I am you. Oh, I see this object here, it is myself also, it is me. And everything, the tree and the car going by and everything like that, it's like, oh, that is the self, and that is the self, and that is the self. And
Yeah.
there's this whole thing, the intellect basically, where before the intellect kind of had this role of separating and dividing, distinguishing this from that, and this is right, and this is wrong, and this, and this is that. Where in unity, it has this role of uniting. It's
Uniting.
like,
Yeah.
oh, that is the self, and
Mm.
that is the self, and that is the self. And it
Yeah.
kind of creates
That's
this,
beautiful.
yeah. And the Brahma Sutra calls it the aggregate. It kind of creates this growing wholeness that gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And one of the old texts even mentions it comes to include even the universe beyond perception. It's just kind of the sense of self just gets to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And how long that goes on for, it kind of depends on how long we're in unity
Yeah. Yeah.
and how much it needs to organize. Um, and then there's the refinement process that deepens. Um, there's that fuller potential of refinement and the relationship with the divine, with God. This is the expressed form of the divine. And then, um, and then there's that potential for God realization at the climax of refined unity, where we unite even with the form of God. Now, there is that potential for that's talked about where people can retain a small division there so that they can still have a relationship instead of fully becoming. But I've not met anybody who's done that. She talked about that, but the people that I know who've gone through this process have always united with time.
I also read that in
And
your book, and I was hoping to have this have God still separate. I was kind of hoping for that a little bit because I felt so secure. So I was at that time really devotional, but for a reason. So because I felt safe. I felt safe because there was still fear in my system, and until I cleared my system more, I just needed something to hold on to, right? So I was
yes,
working with Mother Mira at that time, so the Divine Mother first. It was her, the form, and then the formless. And I thought I don't want to lose that because I just felt so safe and secure by having that there, um, and then when the merging happened, it didn't matter at all. But just before, I read it in your
yeah,
book, and I was hoping that this just stays separate. But yeah.
yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, because I kind of had that too. I didn't feel that the relationship was fully developed yet. There was so much more of fullness that was potential. But yeah, it was interesting. There's kind of a thing where the way I framed it is that consciousness comes to know itself globally and at every point, essentially, on a level of consciousness interacting with itself. There's kind of like this global self-awareness, and then there's the awareness at all these different points, and some of those points express forward as objects that manifest, and some of the points express forward as jivas or souls that become embodied and become experiencers or observers. Um, and then they interact and blah blah blah. But there's a kind of point where it becomes aware of itself globally, and and then but it's been looking in on itself. The observer has been looking in on itself all this time, and it kind of has the potential to turn and look beyond itself. Now, that might not be such an obvious process for some people, but essentially there's the potential to look past consciousness before it became self-aware, before it started to express and all that kind of thing. And
Okay.
that's Brahman.
All right. Yeah, okay. So you have an experience of it, but you're not yet, the Brahman shift hasn't happened. So you mean you can look into it already? Yeah, because this is definitely, so I always call it the aspects of the true nature. So this is what I call the Brahman is, because they can already come in before you in Brahman, right? So all these aspects. And this is what I do with my work. I bring in all these aspects before. It doesn't really matter where people are on their journey, but they can already start experiencing that, like being in the present moment. So because this is the next question I have for you, because I also saw a lot of functions of the body changing or falling away. Like I always talk about the ego stepped into the background with unity shift, or the small self that I experienced as ball in the center of my chest, like the whole life story and who I am was like ripped out. Then the I thought started to fall away. And then there was this realization also in unity consciousness, I don't produce any more karma. And this is basically because the system is so open and surrendered that nothing can like grab onto the system anymore. It just passes through, right? So this is
Right.
this is the energetic
Yeah.
aspect, I guess, I experienced, and this is what I'm working with. But how is the experience with those aspects for you? Because we're purely talking about consciousness.
Yeah.
The body goes
Yeah.
through a big change as well. And yeah, what is your experience with that?
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I was kind of well, in some ways I was kind of abstracted a little more than I should have been. And so I just basically ignored the body a lot. It just my body was healthy and it just kind of was there and did what it needed to do. I didn't think about it a lot. I didn't get called to deal with the trauma until a little later as it worked out. Um, but there is that you did touch on something I wasn't as conscious of, but Adyashanti talks about head, heart, gut, and that wasn't something I had recognized quite so clearly before. But essentially, there's kind of the ego identification is three level essentially, and head is basically the concepts of the me. I am this, and I have this job, and this relationship, and I'm this person named such and such, and blah blah blah. That's what lets the core of that is what lets go when you wake up in the first place with self-realization. And then there tends to be what I called at the time shrapnel, all the kind of concepts of the self that are kind of attached to that kind of break up, and then they're kind of basically over time they come up in experience and you see through them like something
Then they fall away, right? You just don't believe anymore, they fall away. Yeah.
Exactly. You kind of process through all that. And then the heart is kind of like the driver of that gave them the energy. And so that ideally falls away with the God consciousness shift and then the awakening heart. And that's necessary for the heart to awaken, to let go of that the identification here. And then there's what's described as the core or existential identity, the deepest part of the I sense, which generally doesn't become conscious until around unity. And I think that's why you mentioned, and another friend of mine recently talked about post-unity, there was a lot of unpacking to do. Here, there was less of the unpacking then, and some of that happened more later. But so there's an ideal thing where there's the head, heart, and gut releases happen with self-realization, God consciousness, and unity. However, and I thought that was my concept of how it unfolded. But I've seen lots of examples where they happened a bit later.
For me, it happened later. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the core identity happens with Brahman, or I know a friend who's had the heart opening post Brahman. They haven't got to the gut yet, and they're living Brahman. So that process is part of the embodiment, because there's one thing that's really important that we can talk more about as we go along here, but awakening is just the first step. It's not about escaping off into some transcendental space. It's about bringing that down and living it in your life,
Hmm.
because that's where you're going to have the fullness of it is in your life. And we're here in the human body having a human experience, and that's where we're designed to live this. And if we can live enlightenment in this human form, it's pretty amazing.
Exactly. And this is why consciousness goes through all these stages. And then in the end, just to have this human experience, and fully accepting it.
But
And
it's like
it's fascinating.
the potential is so much more though than just having an
Of course.
egoic-based
Yeah,
human
it's
experience
totally
of
it's it's
struggle
it's it's
and
a totally different human experience than before. I mean, it's a
yeah,
lot better, like a lot better, right? But it looks like we have to go through this process to then like have this new way of living, and then we can also embody that more. So change. So I always see this energetically change the
yes,
whole system, because consciousness is one part, and there is an end to it. But then there's a lot more potential to change the system, to have more openness, more light coming in, more spiritual gifts, whatever it is, like new ways of transforming the human, like become a new human basically. So this is
oh
all
yeah,
there, and that's so
yeah.
fascinating.
There's a couple of things about the Brahman shift that we can get into the details of it in a sec, but that I've heard mention is that basically with the Brahman shift, there's this idea that you clear your ancestral line back 8 generations and forward 8 generations. So it's not just a personal thing. That's one thing to recognize about this. This gets more and more collective as you go through this. I mean, even with the initial awakening, you're awakening up to the consciousness that everybody has. We all
Mm.
share. And um, and another point that I've heard several people talk about is essentially that you become a law of nature unto yourself. It's like after the Brahman shift, the rules that you previously needed to live under or that you found were they can fall away.
Yeah.
And you have to basically find what it is you're supposed to be doing instead. And it really depends on when that happens and how that progresses. It may be a progressive thing that builds over time, or it may all come at once, or everybody's process is different. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and yeah, because this is very fascinating, because I just call it like manifestation. Manifestation happens a lot quicker.
yeah,
There's before there's so much resistance in the way, or just the whole human stuff, the piled up energies and all of that is in the way. And then when they are gone and the openness of the system is there, you have access first of all to your potential before it's
yeah.
not seen. And then manifestation happens so quickly. So whatever you're like, okay, I plan on doing this, and then you just do it, and then it's there. And before, there is just so much energy in the way, resistance, fear, anger, human patterns, beliefs, everything that's in the way. And in Brahman, there's just nothing in the way anymore, and you can just go and do, and that's it. So it's very simple. It gets very
I talk
simplified.
about that as nature support, because
Mm,
essentially the world is one of the things that happens with when you wake up is you realize you're not the doer, you're the observer. So what is it's doing the doing? And with the refinement of perception, you can kind of become aware of the laws of nature and how they're functioning and how they create the world and make things happen and stuff. And they're working with us. We're part of that. Um, but when we're in our ego and resisting and all that kind of stuff, we're getting in the way of that a whole lot.
yeah.
And whereas when that stuff falls away, then we're stepping into the flow of it. One of the things that can begin after awakening is what's often called flow, where it's just like nature moves through you and expresses, and it's just like this flowing energy, and we see, apparently solid objects are actually constantly being recreated in every moment, and everything becomes a lot more fluid,
Yeah.
uh, a lot more flexible.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I call the life energy. So life energy
Yeah.
flows through our system. So this is exactly the same. Um, and the thing is, this is where, in my experience and also my work experience, this is where the clearing of the human system comes in, because it needs this clearing that this can flow, that this flow can
Yes.
happen. Because before, there's just the system is blocked and the flow can't happen. So I'm not 100% sure if if you like shift into the Brahman and that's enough for the flow to be there. For me, it was because before I did the clearing in unity. And then in Brahman, of course, clearing is still or is happening, but very different. You know, it's just something comes up, you recognize it, and then you let it go. Like there is no crazy process you have to go through. It's just a recognition of something, and then you let it go in a second. Um, I mean,
Well, for me, it
sometimes
was
it's this
progressive.
long.
But
Yeah.
there was some of it during the first shift. After the first shift, life started to get more harmonious, but there was a whole lot of stuff surfaced through that. Um, and so, I went through periods where, in a sense, I was being supported in my unfolding, but the way it organized that to happen was for my career to disappear.
Yeah. This can
And
happen. Yeah.
yeah, and
It wasn't
so
your highest truth, David. It wasn't.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so when you're working in, I knew it wasn't, but there was a part I didn't know what else to do, and so there was a part of me that kept coming back to it, and it just got worse and worse, basically. So uh, I finally accepted the signal, and then it was really interesting because then when I allowed life to happen as it wanted to happen, and I just wrote, then money just started showing up
Mm.
out of nowhere, and and it's to support what I was doing when I was in alignment.
Yeah, and that's very cool that you bring this up, because this is also kind of a big topic I don't really talk about yet, but is very present, is the abundance. And
Yes,
because abundance is just also a natural thing we have, so it's always there.
yes,
But it's just the human part is in the way. So
yes,
when we awaken more and the human stuff gets more dissolved, then abundance gets more clearly, or it gets more present. And in the end, or eventually, it's just there, and we just live in abundance all the time. So I live in abundance fully. And I have everything I need in the present moment. So whenever I need it. And then it's also funny because you hardly need anything anymore. So before, the human
yeah,
needs quite a bit of things, items. And now I go into a store, and it's like, because the quality of everything is the same. So the quality of, so not like the fabric quality of clothing or anything, I'm not talking about that, but the quality of items is exactly the same. And
right,
then it's really hard to choose an item. How do you choose one over the other if you don't need it? If you don't need something in the moment, like a pen, you need a pen. Okay, look for a pen. But just go shopping and shop for something, it doesn't work anymore, because there is no energy behind just getting something for the sake of getting it. You only get something when you actually need something. You know what I mean?
yes,
Before, there was like this quality. I want to get something special because I want to treat myself, or I want to have more clothes for winter so that I have a variety to
oh
change
yeah,
and stuff.
I remember
But this all
one
falls
time.
away.
Yeah, I remember one time when I was younger, I did a success course, and one of the things you did was you made a long list of all the things you want to, the goals,
Yeah.
all the things you want to do, all the things you want to have, and all this stuff, you know, and and it's just like all that stuff fell away,
Mm.
and now there's a couple of things, but it's just really short list now, where like, but it's a preference. It's not. I don't really care if it happens or not, but there's a preference for a few things to happen, um, and there isn't the sort of the it's not about that anymore.
Mm.
Much more about what can I give to the collective? What can I do to help support this process continuing so that more and more people wake up, and that raises the whole collective consciousness.
Mm. But I feel like when you're in Brahman, this is just the energy that comes in and works through us in various different ways. So it might be transmissions, it might be blog posts, it very different ways. It's just something naturally that happens then, you know.
Yes,
And like you said, the aim is a totally different one. It's not like the ego wants to collect things, it wants to have things. you know, for status reasons or stuff like that. Like this is all, it's not there anymore, of course, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But now, I think
It's like,
abundance is such a great topic, and but let's continue with the stages
yeah,
because
yeah. No, it's a
otherwise,
fascinating topic. Yeah, and the whole thing about nature support, it can be a little more progressive than that, and not just all happening in Brahman. Um, but um, but yeah, there is that progressive development of a shift from lack to sufficiency to
yeah.
abundance, kind
So
of
this is just
progress.
part of it, and this is there then. So then we just live
Yeah,
in abundance. I mean, imagine everybody lives in abundance, then there would be a lot less item produced on this planet. There would be a lot less waste and stuff like that because you hardly need anything in the end. You know, that's so interesting. Yeah.
and yet people can live, and the system itself would support, you know, because there's all these people in you know, they're creatives, for example, that are born to create, but they're in a Joe job to pay the bills,
Mm.
and their attention is on something kind of unnecessary.
Mm.
But anyways, we can go on and on for that kind of thing. So yeah, so you get to the kind of the climax of unity when consciousness has known itself fully, or however that plays out, and then it can look beyond itself, and it's to Brahman. It's a really interesting shift. Brahman means the great, so it's called the Great Awakening, and it's like you wake up from your enlightenment, because before you were intimate with everything, you were everything everywhere. Um, Unity is a really beautiful place to be. And then Brahman, suddenly you're nothing, nowhere. And this sense of the world is that it never happened in the first place. Like before, there can be our relationship with the experience of the world can evolve. We can have the experience of the world as being solid and real. We can experience the world as an illusion, and we can experience the world as the divine play, Lila. But then in Brahman, it's that, you know, it never happened in the first place.
Yeah.
And yet there it is in your experience. And Brahman is really interesting too, because there's all these kind of subtle dualities. Unity brings together a whole lot, but there's still these subtle dualities like conscious, not conscious, existence, not existence. And Brahman kind of collapses all that. And it's just totality. It's just, that's it, you know. It's really hard to describe in words because what we're talking about is beyond consciousness. So there's nothing to experience.
Mm.
There's no content.
Yeah. And
There's no
it's really
subject and object. Yeah.
exactly. And I guess the best way to describe it might be, or one way is that nothing has a quality anymore. And this is what I was talking about before. When you go in a store, everything has no or the same quality, you know, it's like there is no difference between anything anymore. Everything is exactly
Yes.
the same.
There's a fundamental
No,
neutrality.
it's exactly because before, and this is something in unity, there was an energy exchange. Like you said, I'm the self,
Yeah.
or everything is the same. So I always just saw it as everything is the same because I didn't like to see myself in other objects, although it's just the self is reflected in other objects as well. So to me, it was just one, everything is the same. Um, but then in Brahman, this energy exchange stopped. So there is no
Yes.
energy exchange anymore. And so
Yes.
it's like um it's just is there, and that's it. Yeah, okay, I guess it's so
And
hard to
it's
describe.
so that,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's interesting in neutrality too, because that's something that, you know, I found in relationships as well.
Mm.
And because there's a neutrality there, and there's still like, you know, we have, you know, you might have things in common, and find them attractive and comfortable together, and have, you know, things you like to talk about or ways of being together. But there's a fundamental neutrality. And so that polarity you're used to having in a relationship where there's kind of like a charge that creates attraction, and that it's just not
It's
there.
gone, yes. Mm.
And that, you know, human level kind of love. So love is on a whole, it's like a universal um, love.
Yeah.
It's not a personal love the same way anymore. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a there's a favoritism, we could say, to certain people. Uh, but 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 the thing about Brahman is that it's not something we experience, but it's essentially it's Brahman that knows Brahman. Before, everything was known by consciousness. Consciousness knows this, consciousness knows that, consciousness experiences this and that. With Brahman, nothing to experience, there's no experiencer. Instead, it's just Brahman alert to itself.
Yeah.
But often what happens with the Brahman shift, though, is at first we notice what we've lost, essentially.
Yes.
We've gone from everything everywhere to nothing.
Yeah.
So there's
It,
this
it
like,
feels like a big
what
loss.
happened?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then as we're with it, Brahman is quite a bit more subtle in consciousness. And so as we're sitting with it and being with it, we kind of move into it more, so to speak. And then it starts to become apparent what is there.
Yeah.
And then there's also a movement back where Brahman comes back out into the world. It's part of the embodiment process, we could say, of Brahman is in the Vedas they talk about nirguna and saguna. Nirguna was without qualities, and then saguna is Brahman with qualities. And essentially, once you have consciousness aware of itself, it has qualities and and it expresses, but it's all an apparent expression. It doesn't have any kind of reality. The only reality is Brahman. And yeah, there's nothing to point to say this is what Brahman is because it's not an object.
No. You can just, I mean, to me, because Brahman, I mean, the only thing that's best we can describe in Brahman is how our personal experience was, like everyday life experience, for example.
Yeah.
Because how else would you describe it, right? Because we use words and then people have concepts of these words, but it's not possible to actually have to know what we're talking about. So what I liked, you said the same thing I always share, but just use different words. So what I always say is that in unity, an individual has the experience of the oneness, and in Brahman, the individual falls away. So there is nobody experiencing, you said nobody's experiencing the Brahman. This is just you.
Right.
There's nobody there. And this is when I
There's not
realized
an individual. Yeah, there's not an individual self, and now there's not a cosmic self either. Atman has fallen, gone beyond
exactly.
Atman.
And so this is when I realized I'm pure beingness. I'm not a human. You know, this is when this realization was there completely. You know, I'm just pure existence. And this is when I talk about the true nature. You know, so this is the true nature. And this is then it's a very fascinating to look into creation, you know, when you're outside of creation and then everything manifests in front of you and even a person. And this is so fascinating. So before you have a sense, my mother is alive. You have a sense of that person. You have a sense of your partner, you know, you sense that person. And in Brahman, that sense of everything is gone. So you can't even sense the closest people in your life anymore, only if you see them. And when you look away from them, they're gone. So you can't sense anything anymore. So that's totally gone, for example. So I thought this was so fascinating. And it's,
Yeah,
you know, this is
the thing for me was, you know, being on retreats as consciousness, when someone else woke up in the room, I knew they'd woken up because it was the same self waking up, right?
yeah.
Then after Brahman, it's like it's just happening in whatever it's not here anymore. Yeah,
Okay,
it's
that's interesting.
it's funny how how it goes. I mean, it can kind of sound disastrous in a way when we talk about it, but it's really nice. It's like this yeah, it's like this. No, I don't think no, certainty is really the wrong word, but it's like yeah, it's more than permanence.
Yeah.
It's more than everything. It's like
Yeah.
yeah.
The whole human, so there's a full detachment from the human experience, and the human experience is also kind of lost. It's gone. So everything is just gone. So it's just very beautiful to be able to experience that. And,
Yes.
you know, I mean, I knew it's going to be for a certain amount of time. I guess if somebody is there and doesn't know that there is something else coming afterwards, it could be
Yes.
probably a bit devastating, because you're like, oh my goodness, I was looking for love and unconditional love and all this joy and I don't know, bliss. And then you're in Brahman and the freaking empty place and nothing, no love, no bliss, no joy, nothing. But to me, there was so much information just being there. Like, there was so much information, this universal information coming in, that was just fascinating. Like, you just know so much just by being there and seeing how creation works, or how,
Yeah.
yeah, how this happens. I think, like, information wise, this was the most important stage, or the most important experience on my journey, to me.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got a lot more information in the unity process, unity, and well, especially refined unity. There's all these sort of subtle layers and aspects of creation
Mm.
unfolded. But yeah, and essentially what happens when you're in there long enough and you get used to the subtlety of it, then these qualities start to show up. And it's hard to, because it's not qualities like you would experience in the world, in consciousness, not like sattva or flow or whatever, you know. They're completely they're not even unmanifest. They're not expressed in the slightest, but they're just kind of there. And one of them is this alertness, which is what allows Brahman to know Brahman. There's this quality of alertness. And over time, I recognized that there was these three things that alertness, liveliness, and intelligence, and those qualities interacted to create consciousness. That's where consciousness came from. I mean, we're not talking about historical, like something that happened in the past, or an event in history in some way, because this is all way before that. But it sort of had these essential qualities. And then it started to become apparent that those were qualities that were kind of are part of a radiance of something even deeper. And that kind of draws you into ParaBrahman, which para means beyond, so basically beyond Brahman. And so Brahman is beyond consciousness, and then ParaBrahman is beyond Brahman. And the terms are sometimes used differently, though. People kind of will apply them to other things sometimes, but because there's a lot of translations of the old texts aren't all that good, especially around the most abstract stuff. But essentially, an English way of talking about ParaBrahman is pure divinity. Just in back when we were learning to meditate, and we go into a deep meditation and we experience samadhi, or just pure awareness, pure consciousness. Just the mind would go silent, and we were just aware. There was no content, just pure consciousness. This is kind of like, and then, through God consciousness and refined unity, there was that development of a personal God, an expressed form of God. Now we're coming to that in its essence, the pure form of it. And what surprised me was that it after that shift was the it's like it's its first becoming is like there's a story in the Vedas about this ocean of milk, this white ocean, and they of the mother, and the demons and the gods get together, and they use a big long snake to float back and forth and stir the ocean, and all this stuff starts coming out of the ocean, including Soma. And there's whole stories about that. Soma, that's a whole other story, but Soma is essentially this really fine substance that's created by the physiology with sattva. It allows the body to create soma, and soma is what helps refine the physiology so that the refined perception can unfold and so on. That's a whole other topic. Um, but there's this narrative about all that stuff, the parable kind of version of the story. But essentially, there's a very, very subtle, this ocean of kind of like white milk, kind of almost, and it's and that kind of flows down into the physiology. I mean, there's a coarser level of that where it comes into the body in small amounts, and the body then refines it. It's kind of like in a raw form, and so refines it, and then it drips in the subtle gland at the back of the throat. And we get the sweet taste in the mouth. This is Soma. So basically, the our physiology, in the ninth mandala of the Rig Veda, one of the oldest texts in the world, it talks about flow of Soma through the filter, and it sounds like it's something you have, and you kind of pour something, whatever. But the human physiology is the filter. It's what it allows uh, that Soma to be refined, and then it's swallowed, and it flows down into the into the into the physiology where it nourishes the laws of nature that run our body. That helps refine perception, but it also improves nature support. We talked about how we get more into the flow, and those resistances fall away, and so on like that. There's all this kind of stuff tied in, but at
And
a
yeah.
higher level. Okay,
No, I
the
wanted to
higher
ask,
level.
sorry, I just wanted to ask how was your experience of the ParaBrahman and the pure divinity, so the difference, or are you explaining both at one now, as one now?
Well, I was jumping to the Soma because we didn't really cover
Yeah,
that
yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
Essentially, with ParaBrahman, with pure divinity, that same light pours in, but it
Yeah.
doesn't come in little drops. It comes in like
Yeah.
a waterfall.
And this was your
And
experience?
yeah,
Okay.
and it kind of flows down into the all the levels of physiology and fills them up with this white kind of liquid light.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a whole other level of, like you mentioned about gold before. You can experience the golden in there, and you experience the pink of bliss, and but this is like this a whole other level of that. It's more subtle, but it's also more, it's so incredibly inclusive. And and one of the things I noticed was, and I've talked to other people who had similar experience where it flows into the physiology, and so those laws of nature I mentioned before that are in our body are being immersed in divinity.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, it triggers a spiritual awakening process um, for them, and but those laws of nature in the body are shared. I mean, there's individualized expressions of them in this body and that body, but there's kind of collective value of them. It's like there's a principle that shows up as a law of nature that does, digestion or runs the liver or um, that's related to the different chakras and the energy
Mm-hmm.
system stuff and so on. And and so that falls back into the collective and raises the whole. Because then it's not just humans that are waking up, but it's the laws of nature that are creating the
Mm-hmm.
creation that are waking up, and humans are helping make that happen.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very
That
beautiful.
created that kicked up so much dust.
Did it? Yeah.
Yeah, so I got a little overshadowed after a time, and then I went through some medical karma and so that kind of stuff, which overshadowed it even more.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the
It'll
pure
loop around. It'll loop around again. I know. That's one thing about this. I became really confident because there in the process, because early on it was like get it, you lose it a little bit, kind of thing. You go, oh, and you want to hold on to it and that. But then I've learned over time that if you just allow, what you get is even more.
mm.
Whatever falls away, what replaces it is even
Oh
more.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is then, eventually there's just full surrender, and like the
Yes.
system is so surrendered that you cannot not surrender anymore. Then this is just there, and whatever, whatever
Yes.
is happening is happening. Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's a great place to be in, because then you can't even resist it anymore, like don't even bother, whatever
Yeah.
is happening is happening. Um yeah,
And then
but
just
the
curiosity is like, oh, what's this now? Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's just about the experience. So you have the experience and you have the full acceptance of the experience, whatever it is. And then when the experience is gone, it's like you can't even tap into that in anymore. It's fully gone. There's no
Yeah.
memory of it. I mean, a little bit of memory maybe on the mental level, but no memory on the physical. So emotional memory, this is just gone. So it's
Yeah.
like it never happened. And this
Yeah.
is why, when I always talk about we live in the present moment and the mechanism of the past and the future fall away. So even though you think with your mind about the past and the future, it's like your system can't produce a past and future anymore. You're so stuck in the present moment, like this is not a thing. It doesn't exist
Yes.
anymore. It just falls away.
I think what you're describing there is embodiment.
Yeah,
Uh, because all those shifts, we have to bring it back in, and the body lives in the present moment. The
yeah,
body doesn't go past and future. It's
mm,
only in the present. And so when the mind is being a certain way and being agitated about, and emotions are agitated about something going on, the body, even though it's thinking about what happened 10 years ago, the body thinks it's happening now and
yeah,
responds accordingly. And when we move more into a more embodied state and we're in the body, then we're living in the present. We're not in the mind is kind of there and it's doing its thing, but it's not pulling us along with it.
mm,
And we're not getting carried away into the past and into the future projections and blah blah blah.
yeah. And this is what came in with my so the pure divinity came in as a experience in a meditation, or I had a session with somebody, and then I went outside of creation just in the session with my consciousness, and then to the um, source of source. It was shown to me as a well of light. This is where everything starts. So it was in Brahman and outside of creation, and then in a split second, so the light came out of there in a split second. It's multiplying in various different lights, and these lights people can use who have the shift in Brahman, and then they're transmitting. So I guess a lot of people who transmit energy, they use some of those lights. So this is just what I was shown. And
Oh, interesting.
that the origin light, so that the one that came in at like first, just in the first split second, that merged with my system. So it came into my spine basically and merged with my system, and I got the information. Now you got back what was yours before, in that kind of way.
Where did it settle?
It was just so where it stayed, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't remember. It just came into like the whole spine, and then my whole system was. I actually have a recording of it. I can listen back because I recorded this session, but it was like I don't know, 1.5 years ago or something. So I don't remember exactly, but this
This
is
is
how it
interesting
was.
because I was told by somebody recently that there was going to be something like that, and not those words, but something like that was going to happen here, and it would settle
Ah,
in its place.
okay.
And so,
And
um,
that's very interesting, because this is the transmission. So before I already had a transmission, but then this was like the transmission I'm working with now, just the qualities change. And this transmission contains everything that is in creation, like everything we can think of. So this is why I call it the highest truth. And then,
right,
when
right,
you're exposed to that, your system, you pull towards your personal highest truth, and all possibilities are in there, because everything in creation is in there, and also beyond creation. So everything that actually is in and beyond creation is the information of that is in that light, and we can just
right,
perceive
right.
what we can perceive, right? So just this tiny little
Yeah,
part of it. Yeah,
that's really fascinating. Yeah, everybody's process is a little different, so how it
yeah,
appears,
of
but
course.
but I've never heard it described that way. And as you say that, I can feel the resonance with truth there. And so that's it hasn't been the experience yet there. So
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
Yeah, and this is the transmission I'm working with. And this is also the transmission I'm connecting people to, with the next elevation. So they're always connected to that, to the source of source, like to that, the first light that and then all the other lights are basically included in that first one. So everything is included in that. So this is how it was shown to me. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then this work started. Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, for me, it was just this calling to write, and even though I didn't think I was any, any good at writing.
Yeah, exactly.
Happened anyways, yeah. And
Yeah,
as you can, as you mentioned, hundreds of articles later, it just
yeah.
keeps pouring out. Um, Tends to come in waves. I had to learn to how to post it properly, because what I would do is I would write the articles, and then I would edit them and that and get them up online. But I would put like 10 or 11 articles in a day sometimes,
Oh,
and all at once, and so they got lost
mm.
in that. And so now I kind of try and spread them out so that um, people have a chance to look at each one.
Yeah, exactly. Because, reading 10 articles is a lot. Because, I mean, your articles are really, really enjoy them, but you read them and there is a lot in there, often, a lot of information. So it's kind of good to have a little bit of time to read them, more consciously,
Yeah,
not
it's a
just
bit
read through.
concentrated. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
I tried to do that, but it's just that's how they come out. I've
Mm,
tried to kind of open them up more, but
yeah.
that kind of happens more in the book form. But I'm working on a couple of other books. But
I'm
yeah,
also
there is.
working on a book.
Oh, there you
I'm
go.
also, yeah,
It's a lot of work, boy.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, it has to happen.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well,
But then,
if
yeah,
I can help out when you get to the further along, and with the stages that you need and all that, if you
okay.
like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. And I would like to talk about after. So there is the pure divinity, right? And
Right.
after, so what's happening after? Because my experience is that everything kind of so that the stages I don't really feel I went through these stages. So this is all lost. So the information is all lost.
Okay.
And everything kind of merged in a way as well. So the divine part and the human, I can't even describe it, but everything just came back to be, everything is extremely normal and ordinary. So
Yes.
like all the whole awakening process, I have a memory of that, but that's really it. So I that like it
Right.
doesn't
But it's
feel like I
normal.
went through that.
Right. It's normal and ordinary. And yeah,
Mm.
for me, the farther away it goes, the more it's like that.
Yeah.
But even though I've spent a lot of time, working with people and talking to them about it, and supporting their process. Um, but yeah, I know what you mean. So now I just have kind of a conceptual framework that I use that's in the book, and that
Exactly.
it's not really, I can refer back to it like in scenarios like this when we're talking about it. But sometimes I forget about stuff,
Yeah.
and then it's occasionally there'll be things like when you and Colette were talking about Brahman, there was a couple of things in there was like you talked about it from a slightly different angle, and it was like, oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it kind of reminded me of stuff. But it's interesting how that goes. I have a few people I know that are in a similar place, going through their own process, and there's certain. It's interesting. There's certain collective aspects to it because we're very much the whole, and so when a process starts to unfold for one of us, something similar tends to unfold for others of us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but the way it expresses can be quite different. And so they'll come over and they'll say, "Oh, this just happened to me recently," and it's like a little bell goes off, and it's like something else, and something starts to unfold, and then we're sharing back and forth what's going on, and that,
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty interesting, and
Yeah. And
it's just going in places I never expected.
mm.
Like I'm going, the idea that I would take on a kind of healing role was just completely foreign. And then, but then earlier this year, all of a sudden there's this push to study uh, somatic therapy, trauma therapy, and then I'm discovering there's just places in there that have been very carefully hidden away, so to keep me comfortable and safe, by the ego and from those days of living. Um, that are wanting to surface. And so now I'm learning how to do that, and going into the past in ways that I never expected to
Yeah.
want to bother, but clearing stuff out because that divinity wants to embody in the body,
Mm.
and there's some stuff that's in the way. So
Exactly.
it's pushed me into that.
Yeah, and that's so cool because yeah, the awakening on the consciousness level is one part, but then we want to integrate this all, and divinize the body, and this is where the healing comes in, right? So this is
Yes.
very important, and it depends on where you're doing it on your path. You can start, you're doing it really early or a bit later. But what I see is, in like when you're in Brahman, it's very easy to bypass. I mean, it's easy before as well, but in Brahman it's specifically easy to not look at these things if you just don't want to. And this then really depends on the person. Do I want to be as much truth as possible, or do I just want to, live my life in the most comfortable way I can, because this possibility is there in Brahman, you know what I mean? So
Yes.
it's like there is a lot of possibility there, and that the form can choose
Yeah.
how it wants to live its
There's
life. Yeah, and I just
it's
really like, I like when people are okay, I really want to clear this system, because
yeah. Yeah.
this is work, and that's very amazing if people do that. So I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. There are places in all the stages in a sense we can escape off into spiritual practices, because it's really valuable to go deep into consciousness, um, and transcend the mind and all your worries and everything like that. But then to try and live in that, you want to bring that, you want to integrate it, bring that back into your life. And then, we talked a little bit about those blissful states of, along the way, and you can get lost in the bliss and, that kind of thing, or go off chasing experiences, because people have all kinds of fancy experiences and then they get caught up in that and sometimes don't even get around to awakening because they're so busy with their splashy experiences, or they awaken and then get caught up in that, in the way, and in unity, enjoying just being everything, and what it is to be a tree, what it is to be a cat, and all this stuff, endless explorations of uh, out into the universe and other planetary systems, and
Yeah.
it's all kinds or all these different levels of subtle beings, and angels and devas and all this stuff. You could endless things you could get
Mm.
uh, go go off chasing after. But that's not the important part. That's all just content. And yeah, it's living that in your life.
Mm.
And then you're bringing it to the world, because it's not just, the whole thing gets progressively more collective as you go along. And what we can bring to the world and what we can just by being gets bigger and bigger as we go further along.
Mm.
And, it's not about necessarily being someone famous or having superpowers and be a sit-on man or whatever like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Beautiful. It's
uh,
very true. Yes.
Although those things can come up, but that's not what it's all about.
Mm.
It's because the thing is, the more people we can support in this process, of awakening and embodiment, the higher it raises the collective,
Mm.
and the richer your own experience can be, and the higher the quality of life for everyone.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it's although I will say that one of the things about, when you raise consciousness, you lift all boats. And one of the things that's been playing out in the collective for a few years now is that, you raise the collective, it brings the unresolved garbage to the surface to be seen and purified. And there's a lot of people out there who don't understand how to work with that stuff, or even what's going on. And so instead of processing it, they're getting caught up in it.
Mm.
And there's a lot of collective fear and resistance and drama playing out. And but it's important to understand that that's not the world falling apart. That's the world purifying, making its way to a higher state,
Mm.
higher way of being.
Oh, I loved what you just shared. Honestly, like in the way you said it, it's so beautiful. It's so true, and it's you shared in such a beautiful way. Yeah.
I think it's
Mm.
that's a really important message to get
Yeah.
out there.
Mm. Yeah. Amazing. Okay, great. I think this was a beautiful end to this conversation. Um, it was really great talking to you, and I think people will really enjoy that. So that was great
Yes.
information. Thank you, David. And maybe do you want to share where people can find you if they want to connect?
Oh, sure. My website is davidya.ca. That's davidya.ca. And and yeah, everything's there.
Okay. Yeah. Amazing. I will, like I said, put it in the video description.
Thank
Okay,
you.
then thank you so much, David. It was a pleasure. And thank you everybody for listening, and see you for the next video. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.